So LySha, she is the strategic planning lead of and chief of staff office at PwC Malaysia. Now she holds a role where she is responsible for the execution of strategic initiatives and priority projects for the firm. Her expertise includes project management, strategic planning, talent management, HR strategy, and talent recruitment. Prior to being in PwC, LySha was a HR consultant to clients from various industries within Malaysia and Thailand. Now, she's very passionate about the talent agenda and has spent 2 years as an external consultant to a government agency focusing on flexible work arrangements and diversity and inclusion, which works out very well for our theme this year. LySha holds an economics degree from State University of New York, Stony Brook, and is currently based in Kuala Lumpur. Now, our co-speaker, our second speaker in that same session is Michelle Lee, who is a talent and transformation leader, human capital of PwC Malaysia. Now, her experience and expertise includes HR transformation, process improvement, change management, and talent management. And prior to PwC, Michelle was holding consulting roles in Accenture and has a background in accounting and finance. So we have the flexible work arrangements lady, and we have the lady who knows a lot about money. I like that. The topic that they'll be speaking on is the shift in performance management due to remote working, how to measure and manage performance and productivity remotely. So I'll pass it over to the two ladies. And as mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, just type it in the chat along the way, and then I'll record it and ask it at the end of the session. Okay, LySha and Michelle.
Great. Thank you, Amira, for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well and that the internet will be kind to us today. Both Michelle and I have decided to come into the office, so hopefully it's better here. And it's a really nice change for us after working from home for almost 2 years, especially myself. I went on a maternity right before the pandemic, so I've been home officially for 2 years. So firstly, thank you to the organizers of NELC for giving us this opportunity to speak with you today. We're certainly honored to be here, and I look forward to sharing the topic on performance management. I am LySha, and yes, that's, sorry, I need to move the slide. Yes, that's a very old picture of myself. It needs to be updated. We'll do that, hopefully when this whole thing is over, we can come back to the office. But that picture aside, today my colleague Michelle and I will be sharing our experiences with performance management. And for me personally, I have gone through a few cycles of performance management as a HR business partner. And aside from that, recently I've led a transformation piece to change the performance management framework for our senior leadership at PwC. Michelle, on the other hand, is the guru of all performance management related topic for the firm. One of the major projects was not only to revamp the firm's PM approach. I'll use PM for short, yeah, so I don't repeat the word performance management 1,000 times today. And she also led the rollout of our people system, Workday, for both Malaysia and Vietnam. So to kick off, I'd like to start with a simple ask. As we share our journey and experiences today over the next maybe 40 minutes or so, we know that our audience today come from different backgrounds and experiences. So while some of you may be quite familiar with PM, we know that some of you may be quite new to it, right? So we will try our best to tailor our sharing today to both audiences, regardless of the journey that you're in. And my ask is that I have one ask at the start of the session. If you could open up an empty Word document or an empty email or a piece of paper that's lying around somewhere, take note of 1 or 2 key learnings that resonates with you based on our sharing today, okay? I believe that we learn best when we consciously try to recap what we learned, and that is also very much aligned to our PwC's approach of our personal development. This approach that you will hear more a bit later is called real-time development, okay? So try to do that. You can do it for the other sessions as well if you like, but try to capture just a few key points on something that you define relevant to yourself, okay? So I will start my session, and I'll start with the pandemic, right? When it hit 2 years ago, I'm sure you've heard of this many times. All of us are in HR. The pandemic pretty much hit overnight, right? It accelerated everyone's remote work, and it was not by choice. So the past 2 years have put all HR professionals into a real test. And I'm sure of all people, our HR folks here are most well aware of the challenges that companies face and supervisors, right? So some of these challenges, some of them are more immediate, short-term challenges. For example, you may have heard of supervisors complaining about not being able to see their team members. Some supervisors are uncomfortable because they feel that, oh, my junior team members tend to go missing in action, perhaps after an afternoon nap or something, just when they're needed for that meeting. Or some may be skeptical about the output that will be delivered because there's minimum supervision, yet they're just uncomfortable. These are just examples of some short-term challenges that we frequently hear, right? As for the long-term challenges, the pandemic has caused a lot of uncertainties, both for companies and team leaders, and to a certain extent has caused discomfort as well. So many are not sure what would the long-term impact look like to the company's culture and value. Do our new joiners today even know what is the company culture that they have just joined, right? So there are also concerns about on-the-job learning, real-time coaching, and I guess the other big buzzword or the other big concern that everybody has today is staff engagement and well-being, as covered extensively in the first session earlier by Tila. So there's no easy solution to making remote working work, and the solution has to be holistic. We can't just cover the symptoms. So today we will focus our conversation on performance management, and we will share our journey in the shift of performance management. Okay, so what is performance management and why is it important? Performance management is an ongoing process. Although in reality, I'm sure many of you may also feel like it's just a year-end process. When HR say it's time for performance management, that is when performance management happens. It feels like that for many of us, right? But PM by right should be ongoing. It should be a business-driven practice that enables our people to develop and deliver the greatest possible value. A PM process should be holistic. It should be robust. And what is it intended to do? Is to help our people be a better version of themselves. So in PwC's context, PM obviously is a critical part of a people's journey. I mean, as a HR business partner myself, if you ask me in the past, what is one of my main roles, I would say PM takes up a majority of my portfolio, right? So why is it critical? Aside from helping our people maximize their impact and value, as I've defined it earlier, it also enables us to drive focused and meaningful performance conversation rather than a checklist exercise. It's a culture that we want. We don't want people to just do it because HR says so. We want it to be part of their day-to-day work, right? So in our annual people survey, we've got a list of questions that we send out on a yearly basis. One of the questions that we ask is the pay and performance linkage. Do you know how your pay or performance outcome is linked back to the effort that you put in? That is a very common question that we ask. And that is one way for us to measure the success of our PM, performance management, not to get confused by another PM. So we want to create transparency because we want to be in control. We want our people to be able to be in control of their career journey and outcome. Next, we also embed care and well-being as our ways of working. So with all the focus on well-being recently, we see this as a priority. And just to share with you, recently, we have also introduced it as a goal or KPI for our leaders. So it's our first year doing that. We look forward to seeing, what are some positive outcome, hopefully some positive outcome later at the end of the year. Okay. So I think the other purpose of performance management is purpose. We all can agree that purpose is increasingly important or a top priority for our new generation today. So we hope that the PM process can also help our people find purpose and relevance in their career journey. Okay. So how has the pandemic affected PM? Especially at the start of the pandemic, nobody knew how long this would last. So we know that organizations were debating whether to adjust their performance review process or cycle and what kind of adjustment is needed. I think many would recognize that yes, some changes is needed, but the big question mark that all HR professionals were trying to figure out, and I'm part of some of this HR group, WhatsApp group, right? It was such a constant question. People were asking all the time, are you deferring it? Are you changing it? What are you doing? How do we do this virtually? Those are just common questions that keep coming up, right? So companies were trying to figure out what to do and how to prepare their managers differently, especially while doing it virtually. So based on a Gartner poll back in 2020, we noticed that, or based on the results, we noticed that while the majority were continuing with their review, perhaps with some tweaks done, some have made the decision to either make the reviews optional, delaying it, or cancelling it altogether due to disruption of COVID. So this was the impact to performance management, right? As I was reading out the materials, I noticed this interesting article from Facebook, and maybe some of you may have seen it. They announced that this was last year, that they decided to retain the same exceed expectation rating for the first 2 quarters. As a HR person, can you imagine that? Can you imagine all of people getting the same rating for 2 quarters? And Facebook did this for 45,000 employees. And on top of that, they have decided on a 1,000 USD bonus for everyone. I'm sure there were pro and cons to the decision that they have made, but I just thought it was an interesting example of how the pandemic had impacted some companies, or rather all companies, right? So before the pandemic, many organizations believed that they had modernized their performance management system. But now the word agility has now become urgent. Okay. So if you put the pandemic aside, there were a lot of conversations about the shift in performance management. So let me just take a pause here and do a quick pulse check on the type of performance management approach that your company has. Let's just do a simple vote. If you don't mind, put your answer in your chat in a scale of 1 to 10. And again, there is no right or wrong in the answer. And I know some of you may ask, do you have a scale of what is 1 to 10? No, I don't have that. But the exercise is really just a simple reflection exercise for you personally on the approach that your company take. Okay, so from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being a more traditional approach, 10 being a more progressive approach, where is your organization today? Feel free to type your answer in the chat. And as you reflect on your answer, let me just add some color on the approach, okay? What would a traditional versus progressive approach look like? Okay, so a traditional approach is typically done once a year. It has a more fixed or a number-driven approach. It may be downward focused. What does that mean? It means my rating is typically only determined by my direct supervisor. Nobody else is involved in my rating as an individual. And the conversation, the feedback, the recognition may not be very frequent, as they are tied back to that once a year performance cycle. All right? As for a progressive approach, the process typically happens all year round. Goals or KPIs can change along the way. So for example, if I, at the beginning of this year, decided that I am going to lead the back to office plans, right? But circumstances have changed. Who knew that we would still be working from home 10 months into the year, right? So in this case, the conversation with my supervisor will have to change. I will now have to tell my supervisor that, sorry, that KPI didn't work. I'm going to do something else. So that's how changes in goals may happen, right? So a progressive approach also considers a 360 feedback evaluation. What that means is that if I am a terrible manager, my final rating will definitely be impacted because it has been embedded into our performance review. So it may differ from organization to organization. In a pre-pandemic situation, a traditional approach may work just fine. It may be suitable. We were there once in PwC as well. And that's because in a physical work environment, the fact that you can see, you can interact with your team members on a regular daily basis or ad hoc basis, that allows you the opportunity to observe your team members and fill the gaps where needed. But when you're not able to see your team members, when you're not able to interact them on a regular basis, the traditional approach may become an issue, right? So the question is whether can you effectively measure performance in a once a year process, taking into consideration that you do not physically see these people at work and you do not have regular interaction with them to know if they're doing well. So with that context that I've just shared, I will now hand it over to Michelle, as she will spend a bit of time to go through the approach and the journey that PwC takes. Okay, and I'll come back later for a Q&A. So thank you. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, LySha.
Michelle, you're on mute.
Sorry, can you guys hear us now?
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So I was just saying that, knowing the different performance management approaches, that all helps set the scene. But I suppose the next question then lies on, as we move towards a more remote work environment, what should our performance approach be? And if I were to push that question one step further, is there even a need to rethink your approach? Maybe it's already as great as it is now, right? But if your answer is yes, then the next question then is really what needs rethinking? How do you do it? And where do you start? So many questions, I know. And I thought what may be useful is for me to share what PwC's approach is and how did we do it, right? So I'm sharing from experience, and we started our journey luckily a few years before the pandemic started, where remote working wasn't yet too common. So we had the luxury of time then, and then this approach made most sense for us. But I'm not saying that this is the best and only way to do it. And the approach may need to be a little bit different for you guys. So we didn't know it back then, but whatever we did as we revamped our performance approach, were really building blocks that set us up for success and made our transition to a remote work environment that much easier. So many years back, PwC's performance approach was heavily influenced by the traditional approach. And the kind of feedback that we used to get from our employees through our pulse surveys usually revolves around how our performance approach is too quantitative, too robotic, and does not consider good behaviors. Some said that it's too inhumane, and the list just goes on, right? And then one day PwC globally, we just decided that it's high time for a change, and the first step to the change was to decide really what were our performance management principles going to be. We knew it had to be different from the traditional approach. So we were ready to put in place a new set of principles. And when I say principles here, it's important. It's basically the rules that would sort of give you guidance and limits of what you should or should not focus on as you rethink your approach. So as for us, we narrowed it down to 4 key principles that would guide the design of our framework, which we eventually called My Growth Journey. And everything we do within the space of My Growth Journey, the underlying reasons why we do them must always be driven by these 4 principles. The first principle we really wanted to drive was a culture of real-time feedback. And in a remote environment where you don't physically see or you don't speak with your team members every day, having a culture of real-time feedback would help drive more conversations and touch points between employees in a more natural manner. And we also wanted to ensure that whatever approach we take must create transparency, where everyone knows what's expected of them, how they are evaluated. At least it instills some sense of fairness in the process. We wanted to also ensure that we focus on quality development conversations over documentation. A lot of our performance processes out there can be very painful, and sometimes it's seen as a form-filling exercises, our stakeholders like to say. And we really wanted to move away from that. And lastly, we wanted to cultivate a culture of growth mindset. I'm not too sure if some of you may have heard of this term. So we wanted growth mindset as a base of how we think through things, where we will focus on continuous development and not limit our people's growth based on labels. So in the past, we used, in PwC at least, we used to hear labels such as, he's a mid expectation, or she's an exit expectation, but not outstanding. And labels like that can be quite dangerous and demotivating at times. So we really wanted to shift that mindset to, ask questions or say things such as, what can he do differently to increase his impact? So these 4 bullet points here, these are our set of performance management principles that started out with. And if it comes a day where you have to decide on your company's performance management principles, my advice is really to consider taking a long-term view, principles that would future-proof your company, that can help your people grow, innovate,
even as the business models or ways of working changes along time, because all that happens at much accelerated pace than it used to. Right? And so once I've shared with all of you the principles that we decided on, and what we did next was really to think about our framework, right? And if you think about framework, what it really means is think about framework as your support pillars that upholds your principles, right? And for us, our micro journey framework was built surrounding a few key elements, and each key element we come up with different initiatives to bring them to life, and I'll walk you through some of these examples. So leading to our first element of our framework, real-time development. This is a practice of really developing our people on a day-to-day basis on the job. And when this was first introduced, we encouraged the behavior of real-time development by establishing routines. And one routine that I specifically like myself is what we call Take 5. So throughout the entire firm, we encourage people to practice Take 5, which is a routine where we would just take 5 minutes before a meeting to quickly prep and align expectations, and also after a meeting to debrief on what went well and what could be improved while feedback is still fresh in mind. And routines like that can very easily be replicated in a remote work environment. So just dialing a call, say 5 to 10 minutes ahead of your stakeholders dialing in, and maybe stay back for another 5 to 10 minutes just to do a Take 5. And this really gives team leaders an opportunity to observe and provide feedback on a real-time manner, so that improvement areas don't come up as a surprise only at the end of the performance evaluation process at the end of the year. So that's the first element, and the second one is career coaching. So we introduced the concept of career coaching, and I think this concept is more commonly found in the professional services industry. In most companies, I think that the direct supervisor, the manager, is typically the one responsible and accountable for their team members' development and performance evaluation. But when we introduce the role of a career coach, that gives our people access to a manager who is oftentimes different from their direct supervisor. And the role of the coach is really to give a more holistic and unbiased view of their coach's development and performance. And career coach is very linked to the next element that you see on the slide, which is growth conversations. So the coach is the person assigned to coach you, and the growth conversation is the periodic intentional coaching conversations that you would have with your coach. And in these conversations, there are recommended structures in place depending on the time of the year you are having the conversation. You are recommended to discuss different topics, which I'll share a little bit more in the next slide. Now, on career coaching and all, I just wanted to also mention that pre-pandemic, the role of the career coach was typically more straightforward. Growth conversations would typically take place over a cup of coffee. But when the pandemic hit, suddenly coaching conversations over coffee couldn't take place, and it felt like there was just a lack of priority put on growth conversations. It was almost as if our people were not familiar on how coaching could possibly be done virtually. So we had to remind people to continue having their growth conversations, and not put them on hold until they can finally meet over coffee, right? Well, the good thing now is, if you're fully vaccinated, you can meet over coffee. But over the past 2 months, how often do we have that opportunity to meet someone? So we didn't want to wait for people to only be able to have physical coffee chats. And what we really had to do was to encourage virtual group conversations along the way. From a human capital side, what we tried to do was to prepare some tips on how to have an effective coaching conversations virtually, and eventually it became sort of like a norm that happens on a day-to-day basis, right? So I think now that we have established a routine of giving real-time feedback, a career coach to support our people, and ongoing conversations throughout the year to check in, what we really needed next was clear expectations of what it takes for our employees to progress. And so we designed a career progression framework we call PwC Professional. And what that framework outlines are 5 attributes we expect all PwC professionals would possess. And the 5 attributes are, just to give you a bit of an example, whole leadership, business acumen, technical and digital acumen, global and inclusivity, and also relationships. So these are the key attributes that we want, or rather we expect, all our people to demonstrate, depending on their career level. So what that means is that if you are a manager in team A, you are expected to be able to demonstrate the same attributes as the manager in team B. And this gives more transparency on the benchmarks the person is evaluated against. And it sets a clearer expectation as well on what it takes to progress or get promoted. And the PwC professional framework is referred to in during all the growth conversations a person would take, and it really guides our overall performance evaluation process as well. And the 5th element that we see there is the career roundtable. While all year-round group conversations and real-time development gives coaches and team leaders a view of how their team members have been progressing, we also wanted to ensure that the performance evaluation and decisions that are made at the end of the year are made transparently. So what this means is that we really didn't want, or we wanted to ensure that nobody's performance ratings is decided by only one person, because there's just too much risk of potential biases, right? So we would get all the managers in the business unit into what we call the career roundtable meeting. And each and every employee within the business unit is discussed during the roundtable. So how they performed against their goals, whether they've met the expectations outlined in the PwC professional framework, what impact did they bring in comparison to their peers. These are all debated in the meeting, and because all other managers are in the same roundtable meeting, it gives everyone an opportunity to either agree or challenge an evaluation, especially if there are biases of one manager favoring a specific team member. And the process is exceptionally crucial, especially in a remote working environment, I feel, where sometimes when we don't get to see our people physically, the process really gives an additional layer of check and balance to ensure that we are not evaluating based on assumptions, and that our evaluation is consistent to what others are observing of our specific team member. Now, finally, the last element that we focused on was the tools and resources that would support our framework and bring all these processes to life. In order for all this to work, we had to ensure that our performance management tool complements these elements, and it doesn't become a red tape to the process. And in PwC's case, we implemented Workday 2 years ago in 2019, and we use Workday as our real-time feedback tool, our performance evaluation tool, and that really eased the entire process a little more. We do have another in-house developed tool we call Snapshot that captures reviewers' feedback relating to the PwC professional framework, but it's not ideal because then it has, we have 2 different tools that people have to evaluate on. So it's still work in progress on this front, but we're also trying to integrate those systems and hopefully streamline it to only have one tool that we use for all things performance management. Right, so now that you have your principles and your framework, what you need to put in motion next is probably the process. And the process is sort of like the nuts and bolts that brings everything together to ensure it all runs smoothly. And having a clear picture of how the performance management process connects with each other is crucial, especially in a remote work environment. It gives clarity to your people and managers on what to do, when to do it, and also how to do it. So remember in the previous slide, I mentioned that we have a guide of suggested topics to discuss in each and every group conversation, depending on the time of the year. So what you see on the slide really is a simplistic view of what these conversations may look like. So at the start of the year, we set in your group conversations, we would set goals that are SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and also time-bound. We would also discuss and align expectations and priorities. Midway through the year, we revisit these goals, we discuss our progress and any changes in expectations and priorities. And towards the end of the year is where the conversation is typically based on reflections of the year that would later be used for performance evaluation. And somewhere between evaluate and the outcome pillar is where we would have the career roundtable meeting. And after the career roundtable is when performance outcomes are shared, and the cycle then restarts itself every year. And you see the gray box at the top. Along the year, real-time feedback and development will continue to happen, right? So now you may be thinking that, Michelle, this process sounds so straightforward on paper, but how do we even get started by setting SMART goals, right? It's not as easy as it may sound. Now, we won't be able to tell you what specific metrics you should measure your employees based on, or what kind of goals to set in a remote work environment, because all this ultimately depends on the industry and your role, right? So, to give you an example, although we are all in this conference, my goal in this conference and yours are probably different as well. Like my goal is to ensure that I share my experience with all of you, and yours is probably to listen and ask questions about various topics, in the conference. So I suppose the goals benchmark will always be different, but what we can share though is some questions you can ask yourself as you think through the goal setting process for your own team members in this remote work environment. Now, and hopefully, as you think through these questions, you'll be able to guide you into setting some more meaningful goals that can effectively be measured, even if all of you are working remotely. So a few questions that you see on the slide here, in terms of setting goals and measuring output, some questions to ask yourself is what tangible and intangible output are you expecting? How much effort does it take to deliver the output above? What kind of challenges will a remote employee face in achieving the output above? And what support can you, as the team leader, provide to the employee? And if you are not a team leader, if you are an employee yourself, what kind of support that you need from your team leader in order to succeed? And on the right column, especially the remote working environment, we have to ensure that we mitigate any biases that may come with working from home or working remotely. So some questions that you may ask is, is my evaluation based on perceptions or actual output? Is my evaluation consistent to feedback from other key stakeholders? If not, why is that so? Are my expectations clearly communicated to the employee? Now, my take is really, as you ask yourself these questions, try to shape your mindset into setting goals where you'd be able to evaluate outcomes rather than perceived effort. So what I mean to say is, try to stray away from setting goals or evaluating people based on how fast they respond to your WhatsApp message, for example. But focus really on the quality and the timeliness of them submitting their deliverable or report at the specific deadline that was communicated beforehand. So yeah, hopefully keep those questions in mind and hopefully those will be able to guide you through some of the goal setting processes. Now, I know there's a lot of content that was shared, and by now, if you are a team leader, figuring out how best you could set meaningful goals for your team leader, I hope the sharing so far has been useful. If you are one of the HR practitioners who are tasked to rethink your company's performance management process, and you're trying to figure out, where exactly do you start? These are the 4 broad steps I suggest you start with. Now, I won't be spending too much time on this, but if any of you would like to explore the details, happy for you to connect with me or LySha after the conference, and we could share a little bit more. But broadly, if anywhere you have to start with aligning your strategy. I mean, this would mean determining your performance principles, which must complement with the broader company strategy, your approach, and the required HR tools. Next, communicate your approach, equip your people and your people managers with the right amount of resources for them to be able to own the process. It is their career, it is their people at the end of the day. Then equip your people managers with sufficient guidance so that they'd be able to make decisions on how to differentiate and evaluate their people. And lastly, do communicate performance outcomes to your people. Tell them why they are, evaluated such. Tell them what else they can do to be better, what they've done well, and opportunities for them to grow and inspire them for the future. I think I'm at my last slide, and as I shared earlier, we've embarked on this journey of revamping our performance management for many years. I think since 2016, if memory serves me right, and it's really not easy. And we are left with quite a few battle scars. I'm sure all of you in HR can relate to that. But we'd like to think that we've learned a thing or two, and we've listed some lessons learned here, and these are things that I would really wish someone would have told me all this, when we first embarked on our own journey. Now, so the first lesson learned that I want to share about is to always consider your business strategy and your culture that the company wants to build, because your approach, your performance approach must always complement that. So if you want a progressive culture, your approach has to be progressive as well. If you want a merit-based, a high-performing culture, your approach should reward such behaviors. Now, second lesson, and I remind myself about this every so often, there is never going to be a perfect performance management approach. Regardless of what you do, no matter how much time you spend designing it, it will never be perfect. Whichever approach you take, there will always be some people who love it, and there will always be some people who don't love it. And so just to quote a PwC example, when we were using the traditional approach, people call it inhumane, right? And when we moved to the progressive approach, some thought it was too subjective. But really, instead of focusing your efforts on debating with your stakeholders or trying to change their minds into thinking that your approach is the best approach, I would suggest to focus your effort in ensuring that check and balances are in place to ensure that the process is fair and transparent, as fair and transparent as it can be. Now, the third lesson learned is to involve your key stakeholders throughout the process. And I think this is change management 101, really. If your stakeholders are anything like the stakeholders we have in PwC, I can only safely generalize in saying that people do not like surprises. And people like to feel that they have been consulted. They like to feel that they have been heard. And while it is probably going to be a lengthier implementation process to get feedback from stakeholders, it often does save quite a bit of post-implementation change management efforts. So you'd rather get it right from the very beginning rather than to try to change their mind once they have already established a perception towards the approach. So you could run focus groups before you implement something, use their feedback as basis for the change, have one-on-one conversations with influential stakeholders, and hopefully some of these initiatives would help. And lastly, like how Rome was not built in a day, a fit-for-purpose performance approach will not either. In most cases, it will take more than a year to start seeing any change or impact, but don't let that discourage you, really. Put in place some building blocks to ensure a solid foundation. The more solid the foundation is, the more you will be able to build on these principles as your company evolves as well. Okay. So I think that covers mostly what we wanted to share for today, but we do have some time for questions. So if you do have any questions for LySha and I, please feel free to either ask these questions on chat or unmute and ask the question.
Yeah, we have actually quite a lot of time. Now, the 1 to 10 scale you had earlier, we got 4 responses, including me. So it looks like there's like 2 that say 3 and 2 that say 5. So let's just look at that as the focus group for the whole group and assume that we're sort of more leaning towards traditional and going towards somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, Amira, I was going to say that maybe traditional may not be the right term to use, right? Because some people may feel like, hey, what are you saying? Are you saying you're a call-out or what? Actually, it may not be the right term to use, although in a performance...
We didn't say old-fashioned.
Yeah. Yeah, although in a performance management world, then, I think it is the right term to use. But as we were reflecting on it, even for ourselves, some parts of our organization, I would say, would still be on a traditional approach until today, including some of like the leadership ones that I was sharing about. We were still using quite a fixed numerical approach until very recently. So may not be a bad thing. It just depends on your organization, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for LySha or Michelle? We've actually got plenty of time. But I actually found the topic very easy to understand. It was very, very clear as well. So, top of mind, I have no questions, but I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions. Umi also told me that there seem to be some internet issues across the board. So people have been logging in, logging out, being disconnected. So naughty, unify.
Were you able to hear us clearly, Amira?
I could hear you very clearly, but I think Umi was mentioning that there was some contact saying that they got logged out and then log in again. So it wasn't on your part. I think the issue seems to be that the internet is not behaving today for more people than I expected.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think everyone's pretty quiet. There doesn't seem.
This is now LySha. I have a question.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm talking about your real-time feedback. Okay. People being people, not everybody, find it natural to give feedback. They may be diplomatic, yeah, or pretty straightforward. So at PwC, you have like guidelines of choices of words, scripts that guides the manager to give that feedback to their people.
Yeah, maybe I'll share a little bit and then I'll pass on to Michelle to add on if she has got more to add. I think the Take 5 initiative that we launched a few years ago, to me personally, was the game changer. So when we first started, we thought it was a bit awkward. Why are we talking about Take 5? Why are we asking people to do a Take 5? But embedding that into the culture really helps. So what we did was through multiple channels. We start from orientation, first day of joining, we tell people that as part of our performance management, we have this real-time development. And how do you use it? The simplest way is to practice Take 5. So that was how we kind of, what's the right word? We just drill it into them since the first day when they joined, right?
Okay.
So then we give them examples even from the start. I used to conduct orientation as well, and we would give them very real examples like, okay, as you're walking to your car with your manager to attend a meeting, do a Take 5. Talk about what are the few things that you want to do. That's one. Towards the end of the meeting, ensure that somebody in the meeting would initiate the Take 5. Then we would give them very simple questions like, how did it go? Can you tell me what I did well? Can you tell me what I didn't do well? So simple sandwich approach that everyone is aware of, right? So we use things like that. And I think it has become such a culture, so much so that it's now part of the culture that it's no longer awkward. So what we tell people from the beginning when they join us is that because it's so normal, it doesn't feel awkward. So just imagine today's session, right? Me and Michelle. Assuming that I didn't like something about what Michelle did today, it can be awkward, right? And she's a good friend. We've been friends since forever, right? So if I were to just say, Michelle, just now you did that, I didn't like it. You were biting your nails she didn't obviously, but you're biting your nails, it becomes awkward, right? But because PwC has taught us to embed this into our culture, I would probably just end it with, how do you feel? Do you enjoy your session? What do you like about it? I like this and that. How about you? What else do you think we could have done differently? Should we have said this? Should we have done that? So it becomes so natural that it becomes normal. On your question of providing tips, yes, I'm not sure if you want to add on some, but I think at the beginning especially, we even have printed mini cards that we've given people. Yeah, so we did that. Was there anything else that we did?
Yeah, so we also have, now I'm not the greatest fan of L&D classroom trainings all the time, but we also do have L&D sessions where we do teach people how to give feedback. And I just wanted to add on to what LySha shared. I think this is really being in an Asian culture where people are not very confrontational, even if they, when they have something bad to say, it's just easier to not confront. I think we respect that difference in culture as well. So while we talk about Take 5 a lot, and Take 5 is typically more verbal, right? And while we talk about Take 5 a lot, we also do have other avenues to give feedback. For those who are not too comfortable, having a face-to-face conversational feedback, our HR system, Workday, it does have all year round feedback module. So
Oh,
I don't want to tell LySha feedback after this session. What I could also do is to write her feedback through the HR system, and the tool is open all year round, really. So that's one. In terms of tips, we go by the AID model when it comes to guiding people how to write feedback. So you start off with an action, and then so highlight the action or behaviors that you have observed. Then you talk about the impact of their actions or behaviors, and then you share what your desired outcome, what you would suggest would happen next. So that's the model that we kind of guide our employees to use whenever they write or share a feedback. Hope that helps.
thank you. That's very helpful. Because it's always difficult for, I think it's our culture to have that difficult conversation.
Yeah.
That difficult conversation. People always want to be the good guy.
Yeah.
The bad guy is always the HR. They want to leave and let that's the HR work. But I think it's important for and what is being what you have at PwC is you get the managers themselves very involved, and that's important because that's the interaction is with your team members on a daily basis. It's not HR.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
No,
It's not
I
HR
think
people.
that's spot on. Yes.
Yeah. So it's important for the members themselves to hear that feedback from their team members and their superior, because I think that will be more impactful and effective. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Lisa, for the question. I totally agree with you. I think maybe if we take a slightly different topic, but still within the same realm of things, PIP, for example, performance improvement plans, right? The most common approach is to be HR, you go communicate, you go tell them, you go try to get rid of this person for us, right? And because we have embedded this whole coaching into the culture, we then actually encourage our managers to drive the process. What we tell our managers is we will be there to support you, we'll give you the tools, we'll help you. We can even do a pre-session prior to the actual session, but I'm not speaking to the employee. I mean, of course we have to at times, but we try to get the managers to own it. And this is, like we said from the beginning, right? It's holistic. You have to start from the beginning, from the day they join, you embed it where you can. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on as well on your earlier point on how we have to get managers to be part of the process and own it. And I think as HR, while we shouldn't be, holding the difficult conversations on behalf of the managers, I think our role really is to help our people managers succeed as well. We always say that it's easy to say that, you expect the manager to take ownership of their team members, but we have to be mindful that not everyone is a natural people manager. So then, as HR practitioners, what can we do to help our managers be good people managers, even if it's in the form of just providing them guidance, giving them resources, talking them through the process, telling them or calling what good coaching is and what bad coaching is, so that they'd be able to visualize and then be able to know what to do or what to avoid. Just simple things like that would also help a lot in getting their buy-in to be part of the process, I feel.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have a question? I mean, you could just do what LySha did and just unmute yourselves and ask a question. Or you could type it in the chat, whichever makes you feel more comfortable. All right, I see that everyone's still muted. Okay. There we've got the contact details on the side. So if you all do feel like you do want to contact LySha and Michelle beyond the conference, if you happen to think of something, over lunch in between, then they're just there. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook.
Yeah, so we've put that there. I think the both of us are actually going to try to attend the rest of the conference. Like yourself, we are really looking forward to learning from the rest. So we'll be around. You can ping us or you can contact us through the details that we have listed on the screen. We have to admit that we are honestly not very active on Twitter. We've just left it there just in case. But we are active on LinkedIn. If you message us, I'm sure that we'll reply. If you forget, follow up, we will definitely reply. So at the start of the sharing, I've asked that you note down 1 to 2 key points that may be relevant to you. In case you'd like to chat about it, connect with us. In case you like to post, share on social media, you're more than welcome to. And if you're looking to implement something similar in your organization, or if you're just looking at ways to upskill your staff or anything that is relevant to today, know that you're not alone in the journey. So yeah, contact us. We'll be happy to help where we can. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and do enjoy the rest of the conference.